Welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. I'm Kim Ayres and I'm a professional, creative, portrait and narrative photographer. Tonight, butlers, asymmetrical symmetry, and critique questions and answers. And of course, if you find any of this useful, do consider the idea of leaving a donation to paypal.me/Kim Ayres. It's not compulsory, but it is always appreciated. So, tonight, first thing I want to talk about is, Crawfordland Castle. This photo here wasn't in fact taken for the family, it was in fact taken for the butler on the left. Simeon, there's Rosset Bespoke Bulters. He's a time-served butler for many years in Leeds Castle, and then when he finished he set up his own butler practice as a freelance butler. So if you want to add a bit of panache to your event, you can hire your own butler. He then went on to set up a butler school whereby he trains other people on how to become butlers. So Rosset Bespoke Bulters is the one to look out for. Currently, while he's in lockdown, he's running a series of great little videos on various aspects of being a butler, from how to open a champagne bottle to polishing your silver service. A lot of fun, well worth looking at. So this picture then came about because basically it was Simeon who needed the image, and thought, okay, we need a butler in a sort of traditional surrounds. So he sort of went through his catalogue of connections and contacted Aditi and Simon of Crawfordland Castle, which is up near Kilmarnock. Wonderful old, is it Georgian? I think it's a Georgian. I mean, it's been in the family. I think it was originally, the ancestors got it back in about 1245 AD or something. It was updated back around the beginning of the sort of 1800s, I think. So we decided, of all the places in the castle, the library seemed like the best place to do the actual shoot. Simon put on his traditional tartan outfit with the trousers and what have you, and then Aditi chose a sari that matched in with the colour scheme. And this is what we set up. The daughters wearing white. So it's very much an arranged shot, trying to put everything in place to give that. Tableau really is the phrase, where you're just sort of creating a scene. The amazing part here is the dog down in the corner. Now, actually, just thinking here, if I just can't fully see it because I'm realising that suddenly my picture in the corner is taking over a little bit. But if I sort of put it there for the moment, you can now see the dog in the corner. And it has to be said that this is the only photo where the dog was essentially behaving. The rest of, every other shot, the dog was rolling on its back, sticking its nose under the table, showing its backside to the camera, and eventually was put out of the room for being a pest. Later on, when I was going back through the photos, I thought we would end up with a photo without the dog, but actually this one, it was just sitting perfectly. So this ended up being the final photo we went for. So yeah, I will also add in, one of the great things here was Simon was also working with Alistair over here on the right that day as well. So that gave us two butlers for the price of one, so to speak. And managed to give this sort of much bigger, rounded sort of sense of stately home and butlers and tradition, and I suppose when you've got the kind of whole Downton Abbey thing going on these days, then it's sort of nice to be able to tap into that kind of narrative. So Simeon has used this picture many times, and it's sort of certainly done the job. I made a wee postcard out of it as kind of one of the business cards I hand out, and it's always one of the rather more popular ones. So that's really, I was just kind of a bit of fun. Wanted to sort of say a little bit about, give a little bit of background, because sometimes with narrative photography, you've just got no idea quite where you're going to end up. And you know, photographing butlers in a wonderful old castle. Yeah, a lot of fun, a lot of fun. So the next thing that I want to talk about is the sort of tip technique for this week is a notion of asymmetric symmetry. Now, that might sound a bit of a mouthful. The idea here basically is that over the last few weeks I've been giving different techniques. You might have those who've watched it earlier episodes. In the first one I was talking about the notion of the rule of thirds. No, sorry, the first one I was talking about was cropping. The second one I was talking about was the rule of thirds. And the third one I was talking about last week was the use of diagonals. In fact, actually, I could probably, if I just open this into Photoshop, talk a little bit about the notion of the way that this goes. If we talk about the notion of rule of thirds, if I create this little grid here, you can see the dividing lines. So just do that. Then what you notice is Simeon the butler is directly along this line. The heads of Aditi and Simon along this line. It's sort of divided up. But then what we can also talk about is the notion of diagonals. There is quite a strong diagonal sort of runs. Actually, I'll do that in white, might make it slightly clearer. Runs from the bottom left up to the top right. We've got the sort of line of the dog, the arm of the young girl, the sort of opening of the book. And then there's extra little sort of diagonals here with the sort of slight leaning of the butler and these sort of little triangly bits, lines coming down here, lines coming up here. So there are sort of, I mean, it's not strong, you know, overly strong. I mean, we still have a lot of verticals running through the picture, which gives it stability. But those diagonals do add a little sort of sense of movement, a little bit of sort of bit more energy. So yeah, compositionally wise, we're talking about that. But there's nothing symmetrical about this photo. I'm going to come on to that. There are a couple of other photos from this series, but I will come back to them. The next photo, well, the best way of sort of demonstrating what I mean about symmetrical, sometimes there's a feeling that, let's see, if I drag these into here for the moment now. Okay, so this is, well, it's actually an edited version of an espresso cup. I was down at a wonderful place called Earth's Crust Bakery, fortunately closed during the lockdown, but as well as doing amazing baked goods and everything in Castle Douglas, they've also got a lovely little cafe area. And I was just in there having an espresso, and I sort of glanced down and noticed this really just the beautiful, brilliant yellow cup and against this blue tablecloth. And I thought, okay, quick, I have to have my camera with me, stuck it from above and shot straight down. And concentric circles moving out, coffee, cup, saucer, table. It's almost a kind of graphic design, really. But it's also almost entirely symmetrical, you know, from pretty much every angle. The only bit that isn't really is reflection in the coffee itself. Now, as things go, it's okay, and you go, oh, maybe I quite like the colours. But the problem is with absolute symmetry is it loses your interest very quickly. One of the things I've talked about or hinted at in a couple of the last episodes is a sort of notion of dynamic tension. That when there's something just a little bit different out of a photo, you latch onto it a little bit more. It holds your attention. The brain is very good, is sort of evolved, designed to filter out what isn't relevant or what isn't perceived to be relevant. The brain is primed for what's different, because what's different is what our ancestors would have noticed. I'm sure that shape in amongst the grass wasn't there earlier. Perhaps it's a predatory animal that might leap out and pounce on me. Those that had those thoughts were more likely to survive. Those that didn't have those thoughts got eaten and didn't pass on their genetic code. So we are the descendants of those who noticed things that sort of didn't quite sit right. But you can't notice everything. The brain cannot take in all details at all times. So it filters out what it deems not to be relevant. And when you've got something which is completely symmetrical, very quickly you filter it out because you've got the hang of it. You know it's the same from whatever angle, from left to right or top to bottom. So there's nothing more to really say about it. So your brain starts running ahead. But if I go back here and actually just stick the handle back on, now we've got symmetry and a bit. It's not totally symmetrical, but just that little addition of the handle suddenly gives just that little bit more interest. And this is what I mean by asymmetric symmetry. The basis of it is it's symmetrical, but there's an asymmetrical and not quite symmetrical bit element to it. So it's a very basic thing. And on something like this, you're probably only talking really about somebody looking at it and holding their gaze on it, maybe for an extra fraction of a second or half a second. But don't underestimate that either. If you think about the way we look at photos now, the way we consume them, especially through our social media feeds, we've now kind of got used to scrolling through our feeds at pretty high speed. And if you want your images to be noticed, then they have to sort of grab somebody's attention for that little bit longer than the other ones that are on there. The simple fact that you're watching these podcasts means that you've got an interest in photography. And the problem that we all have is, well, I've taken this photo and I like it, but would anybody else like it? Now, if it's only about whether you like it, that's fine. You can go ahead, take your photos. But if you're wanting to put it online and you're wanting to get some kind of response, whether that's at a low level of just somebody clicking like and you getting a nice little kind of warm feeling that somebody's liked what you've done, or you're trying to take it to another level whereby you actually want people to employ you to buy your photography or your photographic skills, then this accumulation of these extra little bits of being able to hold the attention really make a difference. So lots of different things. We've talked about the rule of thirds, we've talked about notion of diagonals. So this week, asymmetrical symmetry, and hopefully that gives you a sense of that. Now that, like I said, is a very basic one. It's just on an espresso cup. But if we go back to the Butler and Crawfordland Castle, then what I can do here is show you a couple of other photos that were taken from when we did the same shoot. So this was an alternative shot where we played around. And here what we've got is very much the symmetrical, but not quite. It's the asymmetry again. I mean, it does sort of obey the rule of thirds if we, sort of, let's do that on a fresh layer, it's easier. The thirds layer is going here, probably something like that. You've got, the heads of the couple right in these corners where we talked about before. We've got the girls sitting along this line. This section frames the butlers. So that kind of works. But what this is really is what we've got this beautiful kind of leaf shape that sort of comes down here. And that's really where the action is happening. And it is, it's got this sort of symmetrical shape, except of course the fact that it isn't quite symmetrical because Simeon is taller than Alistair. We've got female and male. The girls are slightly different. And I think really the fact that you have that asymmetry then adds to that compositional feel to it. We've got other things. The two of them are looking at each other. The girls are wrapped up in their own world. The butlers are being discreet. And so what I love about this photo is you have that sense of that beautiful intimate moment in not actually such an intimate space. But I have a real soft spot. I just love the expressions that they had in that shot. But in compositional terms, this for me is a really good example of asymmetric symmetry. Another one, final one from this shoot was one with Simon with both his girls. And here again we've got that asymmetric symmetry. Girl either side, so we've got this curving round shape, we've got the strong line down the middle, but we've also got the diagonal of the leg, which doesn't line up right. Obviously the girls are slightly different. This one's wearing glasses, this one isn't. So slightly, she's got a little flower in her hair, and the books don't line up perfectly, and it's all the better for that. It makes it a little bit more real, even though it's staged, but it encompasses that notion of symmetry but not quite. So that's really what I wanted to talk about. It's just this idea that sometimes people get really caught up in the idea of rule of thirds, and then they do a picture like this one or like this one, which isn't so obvious rule of thirds and is actually more about, or this one in particular where you've got a very strong central line. Your main subject is smack bang in the centre, and they go, hey, I've broken the rule of thirds, and I've still, but it's a different rule. As I've said before, and I will probably say many times since, rule of thirds to me is a really unfortunate term. It should be guideline of thirds. It is not a rule, it's a useful guideline. Quite often it helps your composition to understand how to divide things up into thirds. But it's not the only guideline. The diagonals are a really strong one, and this asymmetric notion of playing with symmetry, I also feel is a really good one. So it's one to play around with. You could, if you were doing a still life, you could have a jar of jam sitting on a piece of slate or something, and you could have a strawberry slightly off to one side. If you had a strawberry on both sides, suddenly it wouldn't quite work as well, but a strawberry just off to one side might. Or if you had a house with a double front, so you've got main door at the front and then window either side, and that in itself very, very symmetrical. But a broken flower pot just to one side of the doorstep, suddenly that transforms it. So have a think about that. Next time you're sort of looking at something, you see something quite symmetrical and you quite like it and you're drawn to creating something like that, think about what aspect might be asymmetrical, and can you, if there isn't anything, can you change the camera angle or even place something about in order to give you that, or just kind of look out for it. So that's really, in terms of the whole purpose of this series, which is to try and give you a deeper understanding of photography, that's a lovely little technique to look out for. Let's take a little look at some of the pictures that have been sent through to me this week. So I'm going to start with Alison. Now, let's take Alison's picture and put it in there. So this is the picture Alison sent in, and her comment was, I think this image has promise. I'm not sure how to enhance it. I did enter it into an inter-club competition, but it didn't get picked by the members at our club. Should I just forget about it and move on, or is there a good image hidden in it? Take a look. What are your thoughts? Now the photo is called Chilling, and so what that immediately makes us think of is that the purpose of this photo is this couple lying down at the edge of the pool. Now, I don't know how many other people see it, but I have to say the first thing that I think of is it looks like the guy is having a pee, straight up, you know. Now, the question then is was that meant? And at the moment I don't have Alison to talk to directly, so I don't know whether she was intending that or not. If she was, I would have suggested moving the camera just a little bit to the left to line it up if you really wanted to go down that route. If she wasn't intending it, then it's maybe one of those things that's got missed. And the bit to learn from that is you can be very concentrated on the bit that you think is really important, and your brain filters out a whole bunch of other things which maybe nobody else, or which everybody else has noticed but you haven't, because you didn't consider that to be particularly important. It's a tricky one. There is a sense of, well, if that's not the story, what else is the story? Part of the problem that we have here is they don't occupy very much of the photo. They're just sort of lying down. If you're not immediately thinking, okay, you know, there's somebody having a pee straight up, then you're looking for what else is in the photo, what else is grabbing your attention. The movement in the water grabs your attention. There's people walking around in the background, and that's kind of grabbing your attention. There's a strong light against dark bit of writing over here, but these are just the names of the shops. That's sort of grabbing your attention. These people down here don't grab your attention so much. There's also a very large light patch down the bottom. I mean, if we tried cropping this in, so if you said, well, okay, actually, we want to crop these people here, and we sort of crop in like that, well, that's not really giving us too much either. They're lying down, but we don't have such a sense of the space. Alternatively, if we try our rule of thirds and sort of have them along that upper line, so just click that. We've got them, but now we've got this massive patch underneath, which isn't really giving us anything else. So my feeling with this tends to be really that the story itself isn't perhaps strong enough, or is outweighed by other stories. If the story is having a pee, or pretending to, or just having a laugh with that kind of juxtaposition, it could have been angled a little bit better. If Alison's sitting at home going, oh my God, I never realised that, I never intended that, we have the problem of unintended story, where another story is absolutely outweighing the one that you meant to go for. So either way, I think that's kind of where it falls. And we're also back to a very tricky thing, and it happens again and again and again and again, which is for ourselves, for photography, when we take a photo, we are full of all the other things that are going on, the sounds, the smells, the feel of the sun on our skin, or the wind on our face, the temperature, the noises. And that gives us this really big, rich sense, overload of senses. So it's quite possible, it's a sunny day, the fact the guy's in shorts, the fact that neither of them are wearing anything on their feet, obviously means that it's warm enough. So yeah, people are walking around with t-shirts in the background. So it's a summer's day, and that in itself sort of, so lying back, chilling, relaxing on a summer's day. But because there's all this other town stuff going around, and these people lying along that horizontal line just kind of get lost into it, your eye isn't drawn immediately to them. So whilst for yourself, I can imagine very easily being there, seeing the people, thinking, oh, look at that, they're relaxing, it's a beautiful summer's day, let's try and capture that in a photo. I don't feel that story, that particular narrative has come across strongly with that. So I don't know how you would fix that other than go back in time and stand at a different angle and take the photo. As it stands, I don't know if you took other ones at the time, but maybe go back and visit what else you have in the folder from that day. I hope that helps a bit, Alison. Right, what else have we got? Let's see. Okay, we'll go with this one from Justin. Now, Justin said, I was walking around Glasgow, walked around the corner and saw this guy packing up his stuff. I had like 20 seconds to grab the shot, wondering if I could have done anything better. Now, when I saw this photo, I mean, it's bold, it's got strong contrast, bold colours, but I wasn't sure what was going on. I mean, is this guy kneeling and praying at an altar of some kind? It's got that almost kind of prayer-like look to it. But the title is called The Spray Painter. So, and in his description, Justin has said, the guy's packing up. So, Justin's come round, seen a guy putting his spray paints away, noticed the stuff on, quickly grabbed his camera, taken whatever photo that he feels he can. Now, he hasn't sent me the original files, so I don't know how he's cropped it, and I don't know how dark the shadows were or how bright the highlights were to begin with. So it is pretty difficult to be able to say how it could have been improved without knowing what you've already done with it, because I can only actually go from this point. I would say the main thing here is it's back to the narrative again. What narrative are you trying to tell? The prayer one could be quite an interesting one if you wanted to take that in another way. The picture itself, I mean, there's gold here, quite clearly finished being painted. This bit here, I'm not sure. Is this? I don't know enough about spray painting, street painting, or anything like that. So it looks to me like maybe these bits here are guidelines for that bit being painted, or maybe this was a bigger poster that's been partially ripped off. I'm not entirely clear what this bit is, and this bit here is dominant. It's very, very, very strong. So I would guess that maybe it's like the kind of the rough sketch which the paints are then going to be applied over, but I don't really know. And I think what we're kind of talking here, a little bit like Alison's photo, there's a notion of you're out there, you see something, you grab your camera, you capture it, but you're not necessarily sure what exactly the story is that you're going for. I mean, perhaps you are. Maybe, Justin, you're very clear what the story is. But then you need to find a way to relate that story so that other people can be clear what it is. Now, in your case, you've given the title, The Spray Painter, so that's good. That tells us that it is then about the guy. He's a painter, he's not a worshipper. But it would be interesting to see what the rest of the picture was like, and it would be interesting to know where you wanted to take it. Again, I suppose really I kind of come back to, in terms of critique. Critique isn't necessarily about whether I like the photo or I don't like the photo. The critique is to try and help you get to the point that you wanted to get to. If you had a vision for this, what was your vision? If I have a better idea of what your vision was trying to achieve, then it makes it a bit easier for me to say, well, maybe you could have brought out more detail in the shadows, or maybe you should have removed that little bit of light up there, or maybe you should have stood in a slightly different place. It does feel like it has something to it. I mean, I'd like to say the guy kneeling there, but to me it says prayer. It doesn't say packing up the paints. So again, a bit like the last picture with Alison, there's this notion of maybe a conflict of story. You've got one idea of what you think the story is, but maybe what's coming over is a slightly stronger story, but then other elements aren't necessarily supporting that. One of the phrases I think I've used several times before, I will certainly use many times again, is that once you understand the narrative of the photo, every other aspect that's in that photo is either contributing to or detracting from that narrative. And your job then in editing is to try and remove the bits that are detracting or detracting from the narrative, or edit them in such a way that they now start contributing to, and then highlight the bits that are contributing to it. So I hope that gives you some kind of starting points to play around with. Right, next up we will go to Graham. Graham threw this one in at the last minute to me. I was, yeah, and his comment is, sorry late to the show, had a council meeting. If you have time, how can I improve this? So I've not had a lot of chance to look at this, Graham. You threw it at me literally sort of about 7:15 when I saw it, but I thought I'll throw it in anyway because you're Graham. So thinking completely on the spot, how can I improve this? Well, the very first thing is there's quite a lot of space above the head, which isn't doing anything to it. So a very simple thing of just putting that down to something like that. Have that line of thirds going across where the eyes are. And I think that immediately makes it a little bit a kind of nicer shape. Tricky one. Again, Graham, it would be useful if you know in what way you want to improve it. Are you wanting... I mean, this is a classic content photo. Content over technical. Okay, I'll go off on a little tangent here to kind of explain where my thought processes are. I can put up a really well constructed photo where I've gone to the nth degree on the editing and working out the compositional lines and the diagonals and all the rest of it until it sort of sits there in my own mind to perfection. And I can put it up and get half a dozen likes. You can put up a picture that's slightly out of focus, that's really badly composed, very badly lit, but it's of a kitten. 10,000 likes. Because the people looking at it aren't looking at it with a photographer's eye, they're looking at it emotionally. And you kind of can't compete with that. I mean, again, I have photos where, without a doubt, the photos that I put up on Facebook or Instagram or wherever that get 2 times, 3 times, 5 times, 10 times the amount of likes that I get on anything else. Most of all tend to be the photos of me with my daughter. And they can be quick selfies done on the camera, sitting in a cafe, out on a walk. I get a massive response. And they're not brilliant photos on a technical level. What they are is in emotion. I mean, who doesn't love a daddy-daughter photo? You know, it's an easy like. It's a very easy like. It's cute. It's, kittens. It's baby hedgehogs. This falls immediately. I mean, you've got a dad looking down at a baby. The baby's looking up, smiling, little tongue sticking out, and he just goes, "Oh!" Well, anybody who's a parent does. Teenage lads who might maybe watching this are going, what are you talking about? However, any parent, any dad, any mum would be looking at this just going, "Oh, melts my heart, a photo like this." The love in the eyes from the dad, or if I'm assuming it's a dad, maybe it's an uncle or whatever, but we'll go with the idea for dad for this. It's a lovely photo. How do you improve on that? You kind of got it there. I mean, like I say, I crop the top off, but really, I mean, I can play around with it. I can change the colour of the guy's shirt. I can bring out a bit more detail in the hair. I mean, let's see, if I go to bring up camera raw filter, maybe bring up the exposure a little bit, take down the highlights, play with the clarity, add a little bit more texture. We've now got much more coming out in his hair. There's that movement. Do I make it yellower or bluer? I'm not sure whether that really does anything much. I can flip over to color levels, and I could take his green shirt, make it a bit deeper green, or make it more, can I get that? Or yeah, so I can change the color of his shirt a little bit. Changes, I don't know, if I try and change his shorts, I end up changing the skin as well. The tones are too close. But, you know, again, let's kind of increase the saturation of those greens. But you know, what am I doing? Nothing, really. Is that making the photo any better than that? Not really. So you can play around with it, but whatever you're playing around with isn't really going to override the dominant story, which is, look at that cute smiley face, look at that adoring father. Oh, it doesn't need to be technically perfect. This is the kind of thing that you have as your Facebook avatar, or you print up and you shove on the wall, or you have in a dominant place in your photo album. It's not one you have to worry about, is it going to win awards? No, it's not going to win awards in photography competitions, but it doesn't have to. It's already won in the emotional stakes with anybody who happens to be looking at it. Okay. What's next? Okay, let's take a look at VG. Sorry, VG, I hope you're not staying up to watch this and that you're watching it on the follow-up. VG is from India, and they are 5.5 hours ahead of us, so basically it's after about 1:30 in the morning. I know she stayed up last time because she messaged me afterwards, and had an early start. There's commitment. So we have this picture, and VG's comment was, 2 questions. The image is blurred. Is there a way we can make it slightly better than it is now, especially the background, the layers? Can anything be done? And the dried twigs branching out, should we avoid such things during taking photos? I thought it was good to bring that inside the frame. Advise me if otherwise. Okay, so what we've got is we've got a picture, we've got farming, a kind of farmland type picture. The quality of this is, it's a Facebook image grab, so I can't move in very far. As soon as I zoom in, I've already gone past the level at which, you know, so I'd be more interested in a high resolution one to know what I could play with. All these stones in the foreground, tractor in the background, guy walking in the other direction. Here we've got these kind of either dead stumps or, well, I could say out of season, but I don't know what it is. It's different seasons in India to the UK, so apologies for my ignorance there. We've got leaves on the tree, so I presume that these ones are dead. Now, what she's saying here is that what's happened is when she's taken the photo, whether it was on autofocus or whatever, the autofocus is focused on these dead stumps in the foreground. So they're relatively sharp and crisp. But the actual thing that you get drawn to is the tractor and the man in the background. That's really where the story is. And then it fades away in the layers. So there's an automatic problem. In essence, you went click and it focused on the wrong place. It's an age-old problem that, you know, you can look in the back of your camera and you've got a little screen that's maybe 2 inches or 3 inches wide. And because it's so small, you can't necessarily tell what's in focus and what isn't. If it's in focus-ish enough, then it can look okay at that size. And it isn't until you get home and you pull the things up on screens, you suddenly realise that it's focused in the wrong place. Can you sharpen it up? You can to a degree, but it's always going to be limited. And it's also going to be tricky to show on this screen. And of course, the other thing is people who are watching this now aren't even seeing it. You know, you're seeing it reduced again. There are a few tools in Photoshop that, you know, you can go to filter, sharpen, and then there's a bunch of options here. If you just click a single level of sharpen, you can see you might be able to see, I don't know, that it's sharpened a bit. If I do another one with sharpen, that we can do unsharp mask, and that gives us these little sliders to play around with. And what it's really doing is it's finding the edges of where there's a little bit of contrast, where it knows that, so there's a contrast between light and dark, there's a contrast between one colour and another, and then it's heightening that. So if I pull this up and I can sharpen, and it's starting to get quite a bit sharper here, but we're also ending up with overcooking it. There's a point whereby these guys maybe now look a bit sharper, but it's now looking quite horrific and very, very, very busy in the foreground. So that in itself isn't a great solution. Now, what you could do is you could create a sharper version in a separate layer, and then create a layer mask, and then let's see if I fill that mask so that we've now got the underlayer, and then paint in. Let's go to a brush tool, and essentially you can see I can paint in the man and maybe if I sort of just take in those trees and the top of that, something like that. So those bits are sharper. It's still a bit overcooked. I could maybe bring down the opacity of that. That's not at all. That's up a little bit. And you're then looking to find the optimum balance. And that's going to be something of your own eye as to whether you think that it's where that is. So really, yes, you can sharpen to a degree, but there's a play off against it, which is it can look a bit false when taken too much. Ultimately, your aim is to try and take the best photo you can under the circumstances. The better the raw material you have, the more you can do with it on the computer afterwards. Trying to rescue a photo that hasn't really, which is focused in the wrong place, yeah, there comes a point where you kind of go, well, is it worth it? You live to fight another day. You go, unless this photo is specifically extraordinarily important, the farmer is going to be paying you $300 or whatever in order for this photo. So you've got to get it as right as you can. In which case you're pulling out every trick in the book. But it's never going to be as good as if you got it in focus in the first place. So, back to your thing there. Yeah, is it worth sticking with it, or I'd go out and take another photo, keep at it, and it gets easier over time. The other bit, the dried twigs branching out, should we avoid such things taking during the photos? So presumably what VG's saying here is she could have easily stood to her left a little bit, and these little tree stumps wouldn't have been in there. Again, it comes down to the story you want to tell, really. Going back to that idea, is it adding to or is it detracting from? If you take out those trees, okay, let's do this for a moment. Let's just very loosely use the patch tool and fill in where the trees were with another bit of. So we kind of got rid of those bits, and in fact, actually, let's get rid of all the green bits down here. I mean, this is very, very rough, obviously. If you're getting paid to do this, you obviously take a lot more time over it. Now, if you've removed that, we've now got a slightly different kind of feel to it. Now what we're looking at is everything is about these layers. These layers, we've got the kind of larger stones in the foreground, the kind of mid layer, then we've got this darker layer with a smaller bit, then we've got the layer which has got the tractor and the man on, then we've got the layer of the trees, then we've got the faded out into the mist and the what have you of the back layer, and then it goes into the sky. So boom, 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 boom. So that's really where the story is for that, and that's again, maybe you've got to decide clearly which layer is going to you're going to focus on, and unfortunately, like I say, this front layer, which is probably the least interesting, which has grabbed the focus. But that, I think, really, if we're saying, do the trees add to it? The trees in the foreground make it a more real photo. It makes you feel that, yes, I was there on the day. You take the trees out and it's now moving more into abstract. It's now, the dominance is about these separate layers. So again, it's coming down to what narrative are you trying to chase? And if you're trying to chase that sort of slightly more abstract quality and it was the layers you were interested in, then maybe actually not having those trees in the foreground works better. Alternatively, if what you were trying to capture was this notion of out for a day and what happens to be there, it's a tractor going one way and a man walking the other, then you keep them in there. So I hope that kind of gives you a way of looking at things, VG. Right, okay, so last of the photos I've been asked to look at this evening is from Kirsten. Close that. And what we have is this picture here. And Kirsten says, this was very contrasty to start off with. I've done my best with it. Is it worth pursuing? Can you suggest any improvements? So I then asked Kirsten, well, you know, again, what was it she was chasing? And it was basically about the sense of there's curves within the shape and a sense of depth. So you've got light shadows and bits and pieces going on here. So when she's talking about the curves, let's create an extra layer. And again, let's just give you a pencil tool. So I'm not totally sure how well this is translating via the screens and what have you. But what you have here is there's a curve comes round here. We've got a curve comes round here. We've got this curve coming round here. Those are the dominant curves. There's little bits extra sort of, you know, up round here. There's a curve down there as well. Maybe a little bit of one down there. Slight echo there. So we're not talking about straight lines, we're talking about the curves. But what we're also talking about is the sense that there's a depth, that this bit's in the foreground, this bit's in the background. So it's another one of these things where you're out there, you're in amongst, you know, you can smell the dampness of the moss and the quite possibly, I presume this is like the edge of a riverbed. These rocks are looking quite wet. They might be splashed by water or not. Now, what we can do is we can play. You can immediately decide whether, you know, so if I, again, open up RAW here, if I click Auto, which often solves a multitude of sins, it might or it might not. Does it really add something or does it detract? Not totally sure. Maybe I want to lighten it a little bit just to get a little bit more sense of what's going on. I can play with contrasting it up. Looks a bit harsh, not really sure that's doing much for it. So let's just kind of come out of that and start thinking, okay, so the curves are an important bit, but are the curves really being seen? And here what we're talking about is where the light and shadow are falling and what's grabbing your attention straight away. Because when you look at this, it's the bright patches which tend to be capturing the attention. So one of the things where I'm very aware of is where the sun is reflecting off the rock here and over here. So what we might, so actually I know what to do here. Here's a fun little trick to play with. I'm just going to create an extra layer here. If you want to know what's dragging the eye around, if I go to filter and I go to blur and I'll use Gaussian blur, and from this you can blur it a little bit, blur it more and more and more and more, and just until it's just a massive, you know, it doesn't really show you anything. But what you're looking for here is to blur it just enough so that you can no longer really make out what it is, but you are just getting the light and dark patches. Now, if I do that, and then even more, if I let's go to Edit and Transform and rotate 100 degrees. So the point of flipping it over is to disorientate yourself, is to remove your sense of what you know is already there. And this is the problem. And just as I was saying in a couple of those earlier photos, the problem that you have with the photo is you were there, you had all these other sensory inputs going on. How on earth do you make sense of that to edit it? Because you've already filtered out certain bits. You might be missing something. You might not have noticed a competing story, or you might be so aware of the thing that you're focusing on, you're completely unaware that other people haven't picked up on it. So in a way to trick your own mind into taking it, you blur it and you flip it upside down, and then that disorients your brain and you're no longer looking at the picture in the way that you did before. Now we've done this, if you look at this, you go, well, where are the dominant lines? And what we notice now, if I just create that, is we have a bright patch here, we've got a line here, we've got, and then there's a sort of strong division here. So this is really that sort of one area, and there's sort of, little patterns and stuff like that, but it's not really much of what's going on. You've kind of got that light patch and we've got this line here. So if we go back to that notion of, well, what you were pursuing was the curves. The curves, as we did the original picture on, like that, aren't coming out in that. So how do we go about that? That becomes a little bit more interesting. So this curve on the inside here is sort of lost. It might have grabbed your attention, but it hasn't grabbed the attention of the viewer. So let's play around with, I'm just going to play around with a little bit of dodge and burn. So dodge and burn is, in Photoshop you're playing around dodge tool, burn tool. And what the dodge tool does is the dodge lightens up a specific area, and you can choose whether you want to lighten up the highlights, the midtones, or the shadows. The burn is the opposite. The burn darkens down, and you can choose to. So if I choose to burn the shadows, I'll exaggerate, I'll turn that up to about 25 and show you. Then what you can see is the light parts aren't overly affected. The dark parts within the light parts are, but the dark parts, the shadows become very deep. So that's an overburn. But if I want, I could burn the highlights, and then I just darken down. See this patch down the bottom here, and maybe I darken down that patch a little bit. So now that area at the bottom that was grabbing so much of the attention and was even showing up around here in the upside down blurred part, which isn't part of where you're wanting the eye to be drawn, is softened. So it's no longer grabbing your attention to the same degree. But what are we going to do about this curve here and this curve here, which we really like but don't show up? So now what I would suggest is just an idea, but if we go to the dodge tool, now if I go for the highlights, these aren't quite bright enough to brighten the highlights. I'm going to brighten the midtones. Now what I'll do, again, I'm going to exaggerate this. I'm going to take that up quite strong. But what I want to show you is if I start just going around the edge of this, now that curve is starting to turn up. And again, if I kind of accentuate the edge of this curve here, do this a few times, there we go, you can start to see it appearing. Now, like I say, time-wise, I'm doing this quickly and for effect, and obviously it would take an awful lot more time around it. I can even highlight some of these bits of texture in the background here, which allows that line there to feel a little bit more stronger. So now what we've got is overcooked, sure, but you can see the direction we're going in. So if I then blur that, now you can still see. Now you can see that line, and you can see this line's taking shape here. And you can even make out a bit more in here, which we couldn't before. Not that you're ever going to be displaying it blurred, but in terms of grabbing the attention, if we go back to that was the original photo, and you say what you like is the curves, but you can't really see them so well, We go to there. Now you become much more aware of the curves. So whilst, like I say, this is overcooked and I wouldn't recommend going to that level of it, it should give you a sense of what's going on, or how you can start playing around with it. And if you like that sense, so you've got the curve here, you've got the curve here, but you've also got the shadow and the hollow there, and the darker area here, I would say that that matches now up much more to your original idea of you're wanting that sense of depth and layers moving back through. Yeah, I think that's probably pretty much about it. We'll pretty much then bring this to a close, and I would just like to say, well, thank you for watching again. I hope you found it useful. If you did, please consider the notion of donating to paypal.me/Kim Ayres. If you haven't done so already, please join the Facebook group Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, where you can post your questions if you'd like me to answer, or submit photos that you would like feedback on, just as like you've been watching, ready for next week. Whilst this is going out live on Facebook just now, I'm recording it as I do it, and I will then be putting the recorded version onto YouTube within the next 24 to 48 hours. So if you want to watch back issues of this podcast, then just go to youtube.com/Kim Ayres, all one word, and hit subscribe. Please hit subscribe. That's pretty much about it. Hope to see you next Tuesday, 7:30, live on Facebook. Thanks very much.